I'm going to start off today's session and what I call the general introduction by going through a few slides where I'd like to deal with some of the mental health myths that we are fed on a daily basis as people working with families, and especially, I say this with a lot of love to my profession, the lawyers among us really, unfortunately, do not receive enough. Um, how shall I put it? They don't receive enough support. Let's put it that way. And my apologies, I am grappling with a little bit of man flu, so if I do seem a bit fuzzy today, please do forgive me. Right. So today's session structure, I'm going to be doing a general introduction, whereafter we're going to be looking at a few problem statements. Doris is going to be taking us through the problem statement from the perspective of an advocate as counsel, the unique challenges faced by counsel in their daily lives. Ornay is going to be looking at the problem statement for mediators. I'm going to be looking at the problem statement for attorneys. And then finally, Ruth is going to be going through a generalized wrap-up of the problem statement from the perspective of a clinical psychologist in therapeutic practice. Thereafter, we're going to be talking about some coping mechanisms, and we're going to be talking about various strategies that can be employed to manage one's mental health as a professional working with families. Right, now, be aware the formal portion of today's session is only going on till about 11:15, whereafter we are hoping to go into a bit of a Q&A and a shared experience type of portion of the meeting. Please do use the chat box for that if you want to make any comments, queries, or raise any questions. The word I was looking for earlier was encouragement, just for those who are curious, which thought I was incapable of formulating. So, right, let's go through busting the mental health myths. And oh boy, are there many. I highlighted 4, which I'd like to go through, and hopefully it will set the tone for the rest of the meeting today. And I want to start off, ladies and gentlemen, by saying something which may be controversial. Managing mental health is not touchy-feely. It's not fluffy. It's not about singing Kumbaya. It's not about getting along with everyone. It's not about being a soft person. For the gents in the audience, it's not about being in touch with your feminine side. It is not about abstract and almost saccharine notions of, being a soft and emotional person. It is about understanding where you are in terms of your own mental state, to be able to better manage your own conduct, your own thoughts, and your own interactions with others. And I base that on no academic writings whatsoever, so please do not cite me on this. However, let's go through some of the myths. Number 1, I want to say very unequivocally to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, being aware of your mental health and addressing your mental health does not mean you are weak. It means you're tough as hell. Because quite frankly, facing your own mental health conundrums and crises takes courage. It takes introspection, and it takes a knowledge of oneself, which is quite frankly often scary. It's easier to avoid. It's easier to numb. And to really drive home the point of addressing mental health does not mean you're weak, I've put in a few photos for the bottom right, Michael Phelps, Serena Williams, and Naomi Okura, who are all sports stars who have been very, very open about their own mental health struggles. The second myth, mental health management is an ongoing process. There is simply no silver bullet. And no, I'm sorry to disappoint you. A 2-hour webinar is not going to solve all of your problems. It takes maintenance, it takes diligent attention and work to maintain one's own mental health. Anecdotally, my 5-year-old daughter is very, very fond of a cartoon called Bluey. And in the one episode, the mom says to the kids, you know, boring things are still important. And honestly, managing one's mental health is not, it's not glamorous, it's not fun, it's not always an adventure, but it is incredibly important. Then the second last one, before I wrap up and hand over to our panel of speakers, is the following. And please take note, if you are working with members of the public, that managing your mental health is not, open bracket, just close bracket, about you. It is about you to an extent. However, broken people who are struggling with their own internal battles are not as equipped as they should be to deal with the problems brought to them by colleagues. It was very, very interesting to see some of the questions that have come in with the registrations, and there's anecdotally a scenario raised of a professional person who, in the context of a consultation with a family, simply exploded, stormed off, and no one heard about them again. Very, very shocking, obviously, to us, but there, but for common sense, grace, and vigilance go I. And then finally, folks, the reason for today's discussion is talking about mental health should not be a taboo. The notion, especially in some South African cultures, including regrettably my own culture, is that boys don't cry. My wife mentioned anecdotally earlier the notion of, I have to put on my big girl panties, dry your eyes and cope, build a bridge, get over it. Talking about mental health should not be a taboo. To that end, I do highly encourage you to use the chat bar, share your own struggles and how you overcame it. It might just be of help and of use to someone else. As we go into today's session, I do want to say to those of you who have never heard the term urbanal stress and Venlaw Lexamol, congratulations, your life is going great. Furthermore, you're probably not someone who works with families, because it is tough, and it's tough as hell, as we will see from our speakers today. So please make yourselves comfortable, enjoy your cups of coffee, and I am very, very pleased to now hand over to our panel of speakers to start talking to us and sharing with us their experiences. Our first speaker is Advocate Doris Goodenough, who is very, very active in the realms of discussing and dealing with mental health, specifically for litigation lawyers. She's an advocate with 25 years experience at the bar. I think it's 25. I don't want to sell you short, Doris. Please don't have me shot at it.
33.
Okay, I oversold. 23 is still a bloomin' longer.
No, 33.
33. Oh my goodness, that's even longer. So now you have to have me shut at dawn. So, folks, please give a warm welcome to Doris, and please do me a big favor. At the top of your screen, you will see a react button. As a speaker, it is very, very daunting to look at initials on a screen without any feedback. So please do encourage our speakers. So for the first session, I'm going to hand over to Advocate Doris Goodenough, who's going to be talking to us about the problems faced by counsel in managing their mental health. Doris, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. My name is Doris Goodenough. I'm an advocate with, I started practice at the bar in 1990. I've done a lot of family law cases, and I'd like to talk about specifically the family law kind of stresses that I've experienced when doing divorce and other family cases. A big problem for me, a big stressor, is that in a family law case, the parties and their children are extremely traumatized. They're going through the most challenging time of their life. And inevitably, they are feeling anxious, they're feeling tired, they're feeling agitated. And I find that I absorb that anxious energy. And that in itself makes me feel traumatized. And that is a very big challenge in trying to remain calm and objective when dealing with a divorce or other family law case. I find especially when there are children involved, all the more when there's violence or some form of sexual abuse involved with the children, I find it extremely difficult to not be affected by that emotionally. And that makes the mental health side of doing family law cases especially challenging. Something that has always hounded me since I started in family law litigation is the tremendous responsibility involved in in being entrusted with a divorce case or other case involving children. The stakes are very high financially for the clients and indirectly for their children. And emotionally, an acrimonious divorce has been demonstrated to affect the children of a divorce very, very badly. And, you know, also dealing with the fighting instinct between the two spouses who might hate each other by the time they come to lawyers. You know, one feels as if one's in the middle of a boxer's fighting ring. And this is something that, you know, I certainly have not always coped with very well. I find also that particularly in divorce matters, my opponents are also naturally secondarily traumatized because their clients are also traumatized. And so, you know, the legal representatives, the clients, the children, everyone is traumatized, everyone is anxious, and everyone is stressed. So I find, you know, for example, just reading the letters, the correspondence between the two family law attorneys is written with a poison pen. And there are some letters, my heart just sinks when I see, oh, now I've got to read a letter from the opposing attorneys. You know, I feel traumatized reading the letter. So these are the things which I find make practicing family law particularly stressful. And I just quickly want to read to you to demonstrate that I'm not the only one who suffers from these problems. Last year in September, I conducted a survey called Lawyers Under Stress. There were responses from 147 women and 111 men, 99% of them litigation lawyers. The most common kinds of stress that they reported were anxiety, aggressive opponents, bullying judges, burnout, feeling drained, emotionally demanding clients, fatigue, financial related problems, medical stress related problems, self-esteem issues and feelings of inadequacy, pressure, and unreasonable judges. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris, for sharing with us the perspectives from the bar. All of these stresses certainly very, very real in our day-to-day lives. On that note, I would like to hand over to Ornay Lowe, who is a SARM accredited mediator and supervisor. And Ornay is going to be sharing a little bit about her passion for mental health and what she has established as a great need for mediators in managing their mental health. Ornay, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I did not think I would be sitting here on a webinar again after I retired from SARM where I've been doing webinars for the past long time. But here we are. You see, this is the thing that I realize, is that life goes on. And in the work that we do, I was happy that Mervyn didn't mention how long I've been working. But I can tell you that I've been working with mental health issues for my entire career in various positions, obviously. And for me, mental health is of primary importance. Now, I'm a mediator, but I also coach and I also counsel. And in my specific position, so I am an accredited mediator, but I'm also a supervisor. So the new people who have done their training, they come through me, and we do supervision. And we do the supervision in my pro bono court program, which we have now been running for about 7 years. So we dedicate a day of our month. I've got a team, and we go and work in the children's court in the Benoni Magistrates Court. We also have a program like that running in Pretoria North as well. And when I look at my people, I call them my people. Please excuse me, because they are my people. And my people come on board very often. I have a lot of people, also because of the exposure when I did the training, who phone me and ask me, is mediation a good idea? What do we need to do? How do we manage with this, that, and the next thing? And I always tell people, and some of you may not like this, but do not leave your day job. First start, do your training, do your practical experience, and then we can start with actually making this into a career. But it's one of the huge stressors when you have now decided you want to do this, you want to start a practice. All of us who are here have practices, I would assume. Most of us in any case do. And all of us understand how difficult that is to get that going to start off with, but also obviously to get clients, and also to build a secure system of support where if you get stuck, you always have somebody to call. We did have that TV program on Call a Friend, and I think this is very much the situation we are dealing with. So when we start with being, doing the training for mediation, people start off on the wrong foot very often, because there's an idealized idea of what this is going to be. And all being human, we all think that, no, well, we'll do fine, and we'll sort this out. But in reality, it very quickly catches up with you. The training is not simple. It takes a lot of time, and it costs a lot of money. And whilst I, who do such a lot of pro bono work, am not really strong on the money side of things, money is important. So you've got to work out your finances. So whoever you decide who you're going to do your training with, ensure that you have the whole picture in terms of what it's going to cost you in terms of money and in terms of time. Also, your own motivation, I think, is very important. I cannot tell you how many people I have who call me and say to me, but I want to help people. The problem with that is by helping people, you have to be well. If you are not well, and if you do not do well with conflict, and if you do not do well with the stresses and strains, you are soon going to be in trouble. Because in my experience, where we are at the moment, especially now post-COVID, our people that we work with, we deal with highly conflicted cases, such complicated dynamics in our families. And everybody knows this about me. For me, it's all about the children primarily. And the effect it's got, Ruth also mentioned this, in my other practice, I do work with children, and it's enormous, the impact that it has on children and their development, but also their vision of what life is supposed to be like. So our children go into the world already with a skewed view of what the life is supposed to be. So with all of this said, I think it's very important for us to understand that we have to be well. We have to be physically well. Here we sit with Mervyn today with a terrible flu, but he's here because this is his thing. We often have the same situation because we have to be physically well. So you have to look after yourself. You have to sleep properly. You have to eat well. You've got to train in something or another, because a lot of us sit all the time. So we get tired of just sitting all the time. Plus, you're working blind a great deal of the time, because people phone you and say, this is what we want, but you really have no picture of what they want. So you walk into this virtually blind. So in your system of looking at who you are going to take on as clients, you have to do good homework. You have to make very, very sure that these are people that will fit with you and your approach, and that you will fit. They will fit. Well, both of you will fit, so that it's a good fit, and we can then work together. A lot of the time, mediators will call me and say, "Well, I've taken on these clients, but it's this problem, that problem." There are certain issues that we have to sort out before. One of the things I admire about Mervyn is the fact that he is a businessman. And I think we all have to understand that having a mediation practice is not a welfare organization. It's a business, and it's got to be run on business principles. It's vitally important that we have a system in place, that we know what we're doing, our admin is up to date, we do the proper looking at the people who want to work with us, and so that we have a good marriage. We work with broken marriages all the time, so we know what it's like when marriages are not good. So these are some of the problem areas we get stuck with. And part of what we've been, Mervyn and I've been working on this concept now for quite a while, looking at integrating family law professionals. And I must say that Mervyn's group has gone a long way to assist, especially our mediators, with the legal issues. Because remember, as mediators, we work in the shadow of the law. So that means we are not trained in law per se. There's a very brief training that you get on this. And so the shadow of the law, you get stuck sometimes with the legal issues, and then it's very useful. And as we move forward with this, we will continue to use Mervyn for the legal issues. We are not going to look at that. The focus of what I'm trying to do here, and this is I've had so many requests for us to do something like this. The request is about mediation itself, and then, of course, the well-being of our mediators. So we are still in the beginning stages of putting this together. You will hear from Ruth and Doris later that they've got a system going already. We will do the homework and see how this is going to work for us as mediators. But I love mediation. I often have this in court, that the magistrates, I'm a favorite person in court, by the way, purely because they love the fact that we do all the hard work and they get time to do their reports and stuff. But you need to have a good, obvious relationship with your magistrates. But a very important issue is to be calm. Be ready, be prepared, know that you've got enough backup physically, intellectually, emotionally to take on whatever comes your way. In court, we have no way of knowing what's going to happen. But in our practices, we do. But if we don't do our homework, if we're desperate for payment, if we're desperate for cash, and we just take on whatever comes past without looking at what the dynamics are. Is this something I have worked with? We all have specialities. We all have focus areas. So, that in brief is how I see our mediation profession, a wonderful profession, a real profession where we can save people's lives. We can actually help families to stay together, and if not, to function properly. It's a wonderful profession, provided we do this well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Orne. I really appreciate your input regarding the problem statement insofar as mediators are concerned. And when I say problem statement, I'm talking specifically about looking at the unique challenges faced by mediators. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I have been saddled with the dubious privilege of doing the problem statement for attorneys. And I've been racking my brain on how to do this without making everyone run away, because I believe attorneys have a very, very serious plight. And I would like to start anecdotally telling you a story to illustrate my point. About a week ago, we were away for the weekend near Pilanesberg at a resort, and there was a colony of feral cats. And my wife and I, unfortunately, are very, very open-hearted individuals. So when this little 5-week-old ginger kitten with no mommy came and sat on our porch, both of us immediately said, well, you are going home with us. And she has gone home with us, and we've had her to the vet, and she's putting on weight nicely, and she's very, very healthy, and her name is Matilda. However, we also have Margot and Moose. Margot and Moose are 2 older ginger cats. And then we have Abby and Basil, who are our spaniel and our corgi. The result is that poor little Matilda is sleeping alone in a glass atrium at the moment so that the other animals can see her and she can see them. And they can initially hiss at each other, but they are not ready to be introduced. And I think allegorically that is the best description of bloody attorneys I've ever heard in my life. We are not kind to one another. We are not often kind to our clients. The story we'll hear later is we're not often kind to the counsel we work with. Why? Because it's seen as a sign of weakness. Showing empathy diminishes one's perception of steadfastness, of strength. So we have to be bulldogs. You know, I hate it when someone says, I need a divorce lawyer who's a real bulldog. Well, then that bulldog's probably going to fuck up the case. Let's be honest, if I can be as blunt as that. Dealing with family difficulties as an attorney requires a lot of finesse. It requires tension, very often on 3, 4, 5 levels, tension between your office and your opponent's office, tension between yourself and the counsel you manage, tension between your client. Especially, we had a beautiful story on the group earlier this week of an attorney who said, my client is doing X, Y, Z. I'm actually wanting to fire them. And I was very heartened by that, knowing there are attorneys who actually take their clients to task on their bad behavior. However, unfortunately, this tension that we feel on a daily basis converts into stress, converts into assimilating tension. I generally have a joke saying, you know, don't trust an attorney or an advocate who doesn't swear like a trooper, because they're probably not working hard enough. Maybe it's just to justify my own poor behavior, but it is something we see quite a lot with people at the bar or working as attorneys, because you have to have that release of stress the whole time, and it's not healthy, it's not attractive, it's not nice. But I think if I can really characterize the stress of attorneys, it's being the middleman and managing this tension between a lot of players. That brings with it another stressor, and that is the following. When something goes wrong in court, the primary obligation to debrief with the client falls on the attorney. And one has to, unfortunately, in those instances, we know things go wrong. We have an adversarial process. There will always, if you litigate, even though some judges try to slice the baby in half, you will generally have a clear winner and a clear loser in litigation matters. So in any litigation matter that generally goes to trial, family law or otherwise, there will be one attorney that has to go back and pick up the pieces with their client, who's heartbroken, who's sad, who's disappointed, who might not want to pay their account. I got a bad outcome. Why must I pay you? Well, because I did the work and I did it to the best of my abilities. Then there's another tension, ladies and gentlemen, and it's this. You have to be empathetic to your client. You have to say, sure, I'm sorry this happened. but you have to do it in such a way without conceding any liability. I didn't stuff up. SHA will not insure me anymore. The LPC or the LPP, IF or whatever the acronym is now won't pay out a claim if I was negligent, if the other side got us on a technical point. Never mind that I sat until midnight drafting papers, phoned 7 colleagues, agonized, stressed, researched. I can't be human because I have to be steadfast, showing empathy, showing humanness, showing emotion, signs of weakness. Why? Ladies and gentlemen, I want to wrap up my portion on the challenges faced by attorneys on a story which I read in a book, a fantastic book for those who are interested in the topic, by an American psychologist called Vermeulen Attorneys, called Stress Management for Lawyers. Easy to find on Amazon. And the author tells anecdotally about one of their clients who was faced with a severe inferiority complex. And after a few weeks of therapy and of exploring, they realized that the reason this lawyer had this inferiority complex was because they were the only partner in their law firm who had not yet had a heart attack at the office. Expectations, ladies and gentlemen, on attorneys are sick. How are we as family professionals going to serve families that are already in crisis when we are ourselves in crisis? I will be the first one to share, ladies and gentlemen, in today's session. I've had cases where things have not gone right. I was in tatters. Ask my wife. She's in this session. Put strain on my marriage. It's put strain on my daughter. I'm telling you now, attorneys who are watching this, and even advocates who are watching this, if you have a devastating loss in court and you can just shrug it off, then you need to ask yourself some serious questions. So, without being too morbid, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to hand over to Ruth Anser, who's a clinical psychologist in therapeutic practice, who specializes in dealing with legal professionals and managing their mental health. And I want to say to you this, before we end on too morbid a note on mine. I know a lot of people are saying, shit, but he's generally so jolly, you know. The reality is we need to start being real as legal practitioners, specifically legal practitioners who deal with families. We need to start being authentic and being human, because if we are not human and authentic ourselves, how are we expected to understand, empathize, and have basic humanness and dignity to people going through crisis in the most fundamental form of the human experience, the family? Thank you very much. Ruth, over to you. I hope you can lift our spirits, but knowing what you're going to talk about, probably not.
Yes, apologies for that, but I was given a topic about lawyers and stress, and so I didn't really put in my humorous, all my jokes and all my, so yeah, I'm not sure if I can lift your spirits, but maybe by knowing that you're not alone, that's really important. So hi everyone, it's lovely to be on this webinar with you. Just to introduce myself, I am a clinical psychologist, as Mervyn said. And I actually grew up in a family, the combination of focus on mental health, kind of in terms of my parents. My father is an advocate, he's retired now, and my mother was always involved in social work and counseling. So I grew up in a home where there was a focus on the combination of kind of legal and kind of mental health. And 3 of the 4 children are either lawyers or psychologists. So, and in terms of, I began my career as a social worker, and I worked for a few years in children's homes. So I was involved in the courts, in some of the, where children had been removed by the courts and placed in the care of the children's homes. And then as a clinical psychologist, I've been involved in a lot of medical legal work. I've focused on personal injury and medical negligence. And I've actually stayed away from doing any of the family law work and the custody work. And I think that already tells you something, because my colleagues in the field are constantly talking about how stressful it is in terms of always being reported to the HPCSA when, you know, when certain parties haven't liked their reports. And although I'm still involved in a lot of stressful issues, the fact that I've chosen to not get involved in the family law matters well, that was me taking care of myself, but it also shows, it's an indication of the kind of very, very stressful fields that you guys are in. So I also want to just point out that although stress is inevitable in your lives as lawyers, it's not necessarily unhealthy. Mild to moderate levels of stress that are within our capability can actually present positive challenges. And a lot of our daily stress is governed by how we perceive stress. So it's how we perceive our coping abilities. When we can see stress as positive and manageable, the stress response can actually improve our performance. The problem is, it can also lead to negative consequences like burnout when the stresses become overwhelming. So stresses that pose the greatest risk of harm are those that are uncontrollable, ambiguous, and unpredictable, and also chronic. And those are the kind of stresses that we perceive as exceeding our ability to cope. So studies consistently show that high levels of stress, particularly stress that is unrelenting, is a strong and consistent precursor to a whole host of physical and emotional health issues. On a simplified level, this is what it looks like. Unrelenting stress instills an array of uncomfortable feelings, and sometimes feelings that feel intolerable, both physical and emotional. So we as humans are adverse to pain, and we reach for whatever will take that pain away. But too often, what is initially a quick and convenient way to alleviate pain brings a whole host of other problems in the long term. And we know that the practice of law, particularly family law, is consistently and in many ways unavoidably stressful. Being caught between demanding clients and difficult opposing counsel, and then also being subject to trial-weary judges who are sometimes very grumpy, all while trying to operate a business in constantly changing times, is a recipe for unrelenting stress. The legal profession has started waking up to the fact that it has a serious problem with mental health disorders and substance abuse disorders. In 2016, a study was published of almost 13,000 currently practicing lawyers in the US. It found between 21 and 36% qualify as problem drinkers. It also found that between approximately 28%, 19%, and 23% are struggling with some level of depression, anxiety, and stress, respectively. In the same year, there was a study that involved 15 law schools and over 3,300 law students. They were looking at their well-being. It found that 17% experienced some level of depression, 14% experienced severe anxiety, 23% had mild or moderate anxiety, and 6% reported serious suicidal thoughts in the past year. And 1/4 fell into the category of being at risk for substance use disorder. The most common barriers to seeking treatment that lawyers reported were believing it to be a hassle to find the right person or the right treatment, social stigma, fear of adverse reactions by others whose opinions are important to them, jeopardizing their professional standing, Also viewing help seeking as a sign of weakness, having a strong preference for self-reliance or having a tendency towards perfectionism, fear of career repercussions, big concerns over confidentiality, and also doubting that treatment will be effective. And then lack of time in busy schedules. So lawyers and law students, they do, and it's commonly known that you have hectic, stressful lives, and that means that you're going to perceive obstacles to accessing treatment. And that means that any signs of mental health stress like anxiety or depression is going to be left alone. And the result of all these barriers is that rather than seeking help earlier, many of you will wait until your symptoms are so severe that they interfere with daily functioning. I have worked, as Mervyn said, with many lawyers. I do work with many lawyers in my therapy practice. And almost all of them have expressed an appreciation for the fact that they have a safe space, that they're able to let their guard down, because there's tremendous pressure to pretend you're fine all the time, to pretend that you're stronger than your opponent, and to make your clients feel confident in you. And putting on that coping, confident exterior can be exhausting. Constant theme of the people I work with is dealing with burnout. Many are constantly working overtime. A lot of lawyers are perfectionists, which means that it's very hard to accept anything other than a win every time, which is impossible. So I want to just talk about a few of the things that I found have been very useful with some of the clients that I work with who've managed to deal with their stress. So when we set a standard, I think it's important that you check your perspective on what it means to succeed. Stress and its debilitating effects skyrocket when we set standards for ourselves that require absolute success in each case, which is impossible, as well as the satisfaction of all clients, which you all know is impossible. So lawyers, by and large, as I said, are perfectionists. And that is a setup. Perfectionism in general is a setup for severe stress and dysfunctional responses to it. You need to recognize that it's possible to be a good lawyer and not require perfection from yourself. I think you need to find strategies for finding balance and reducing stress. You need to gain perspective on what success means. A loss is not the end of the world. You may very well win next time. And realizing that a successful life is more important. It's more than being the best lawyer. It's also about enjoying what you have. So it's those people who have been able to appreciate the people that they love while being proud of their profession and being conscious about not letting this overshadow everything else, have been able to manage their stress more effectively. Also, intentionally and consistently turning your attention from what is wrong with your life and the others in it to what is right begins to build a habit of looking for good and looking for what is working. That, for me, is something I often use when things seem to be overwhelming. Instead of just looking at the disasters, we look for what is working. We look for the people who are helping, just to feel some kind of inspiration rather than get too bogged down in the sadness and in the helplessness. Really important is don't underestimate human connection. Connecting with the positive people in your life, not the toxic ones, is both stress reducing and resilience boosting. The benefits are even stronger when a connection is made with others who've experienced a common hardship. So sharing strategies and horror stories, combine resources when possible, debrief with trusted colleagues. And finally, we need to break down the stigma that surrounds these behavioral health issues. This webinar is part of it. Once we know it's okay to talk about these issues in the open, it becomes easier for those of you who are suffering from some of them to know that you're not the only lawyer experiencing these issues. You can ask for help and receive it, and you can recover and be successful. So if you find yourself slipping from what we would term the yellow light to the red light zone, please be open to asking for support. It can be through friends, families, colleagues, individual therapy, or a support group. And that is something that Doris and I will talk about earlier, because that is an initiative that we have started. Thanks.
Wonderful. Ruth, thank you so much for highlighting the behaviors to look out for, and to understand where everything fits in and how these things fit together. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's clear from a few things that this is something that warrants discussion. I do want to give you an idea of how broad this discussion actually is. We've made some good traction with the ThinkLegal webinars. We've been going for about a year now. But just to give you an idea of how much of a need there is for this within the profession, this is our best attended webinar to date. We've had 92 people join. Where on some of the hardball, open quote, close quote topics, we would look at significantly less people. So clearly, if you are wondering about managing your own mental health, the first thing that you need to know is you are not alone. There's a lot of people out there who feel similarly. So in terms of wrapping up this problem statement, in terms of grappling from the perspective of lawyers to mental health practitioners to ADR professionals, we must acknowledge that we deal with unique stressors as family professionals. A lot of people refuse to do family law because they say it is simply too traumatic. It's simply too difficult. It's too emotionally charged. And to an extent, they may be right. It is emotionally charged. It is difficult. It is traumatic. But that is why we as family practitioners need to make sure that we are well equipped, because there's a lot of good that we can do to help these families in crisis, provided that we look after ourselves first, and that we are okay and equipped to do that. So I want to talk about coping mechanisms now. So we've now gone through the problem statement. So I want to tell you guys about my coping mechanism, and it's called GAS. It's called Gear Acquisition Syndrome. I'm a musician. I really enjoy music, but at one point I enjoyed buying guitars more than I enjoyed playing guitars, where I would walk into my friend's guitar shop here on Deckers, and the guy who owned the guitar shop would make fun of me for the amount of guitars that I own. And I went, okay, that's a bit of a problem. I need to scale down. And as funny as it sounds, I realized that this was an unhealthy coping mechanism, because I was living from dopamine shot to dopamine shot. Every time a new guitar would arrive, whether it was a cheapy banger, whether it was something expensive, you get that dopamine shot. And obviously, it's not sustainable long term, and I've had to scale down, and I have scaled down to the chagrin of my wife, because I have a little mental breakdown every time a guitar has to go. But in any event, I put out a call earlier this week to some of our group members to ask them about some of their coping mechanisms, and we got some really, really nice feedback on the group, as well as private feedback in terms of what coping mechanisms, or what I've termed informal coping mechanisms, people use to deal with their stress. And I'm going to share one or two with you. I really like some of them. So one of our group members, obviously all of this I'm going to share anonymously, says, I have coping strategies, exercise regularly, do yoga and meditation. I see an energy healer. I also see a psychologist at least once a month to test my biases, etc. This is from a mediator's point of view. So these are quite nice. But then I quite like one of the more out there ones, where also a mediator says, I've done numerous bungee jumps and skydive and river rafting, etc. So I like to push my limits. Plus, you realize how small you are in the greater scheme of things when you do stupid shit like this. I thought that was great. You tend to take things less seriously. And, you know, there are really great informal coping mechanisms that one can employ to start kind of taking the edge off, as it were. However, what I would like to focus on in this discussion today is a few more formal ways that people can start addressing their own mental health within the context of family practice. In the olden days, we used to very frequently say, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. For family professionals, it's really not an option. We are, for better or worse, passionate about what we do, and the heat's not going to get any less. We need to get more resilient. So the first chance I'd like to give to talk to you guys about coping mechanisms, or the first slot, I'm going to hand over to Doris to talk about some of her coping mechanisms that she employs in her practice. So Doris, over to you.
Thank you, Mervyn. Before I get into the more touchy-feely things that I do to help my mental health, I want to share the practical things which have to be in place. And that has to do with setting boundaries between the client and sometimes also between me and the instructing attorney. The first thing is to get the fee arrangements and fee rates openly discussed and in place at the outset. A lot of stress, especially in my junior years, came from, you know, halfway through the divorce matter, the client runs out of money, or the client complains that they didn't know it was going to cost that much. And the financial stress is something that I have chosen to deal with by discussing the question of fees and making sure that we're all on the same page from the outset, because that helps the client to feel more contained and therefore me and the attorney to feel more contained. The second kind of practical boundary is that I never allow the client to phone me. I'm talking to the advocates here, to phone me or to communicate with me directly. That pleasure and pain falls to the attorney. So the third practical boundary is an important one, and it's something that I always do. At the very first consultation with a divorce client, if I see the client is stressed, I always ask, do you have a support system? Do you have someone who can guide you through this emotionally? And if they don't, I always suggest, if they can afford it, to go to a therapist or consulting social worker. If they can't afford it, go to their church and go to the counseling service or some other form of support, because I, as the advocate, cannot give emotional support to my client. I can be empathetic, I can be kind and so on, but I cannot carry their emotional burden for them. So those are the three practical boundaries which help me with my mental health and enable me to do a better job.
Wonderful.
The other kind of thing that helps me with support my mental health is intensive self-care. I had a nervous breakdown in 2013. I had been extremely burnt out for some time, and then there was a tragic death in our family which tipped me over the edge into a nervous breakdown. And I do believe that had I taken better care of myself, I might not have collapsed mentally. The things that I do now is, number one, I am in ongoing therapy with a clinical psychologist. I also belong to a support group. I have 2 people in my life who totally accept me as I am, and I can be totally authentic with them. I can phone them to vent. I can show all my bad stuff if I want to, and I trust them for their wisdom and sound judgment in advising me about the way forward. I also practice prayer and meditation on a daily basis. For me to connect with something greater than myself as a source of wisdom and acceptance is a very important part of my mental health. I plan my day. I'm not perfect, but on the days when I plan my day and I schedule in that from 3 o'clock until 4 o'clock, I'm going to have a nap. And please don't faint, because I know we attorneys and advocates are supposed to be invincible and not need naps. I do that. And it really, I believe, makes me more productive, and it makes me a better advocate. I look after my health with extremely good nutrition. I take that very seriously. And I do schedule in times for doing things that I really find enjoyable, spending some time with my daughter, doing some artwork. You know, I love doing decoupage or knitting or crochet. And I need to have that balance. And my tagline for the Serene Lawyer is, because self-care makes you a better lawyer. And I try to practice that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Doris. I will be releasing you very, very shortly, but I've got one or two questions that I want to just discuss with you before you switch your camera off, please. When you mentioned prayer and meditation, Doris, it reminds me of a very dear mediator friend of mine who, during her articles, which was in a small town, and her dad's one friend, the Wim, was a prokureur in the klein dorpie, and he said, "Pop, vandag leer ek vir jou die prokureur se gebed. Liewe Jesus, beskerm my vandag van my kollegas. Amen." So for those of us who are English, the attorney's prayer: "Dear Lord, please protect me from my colleagues today. Amen." So I thought that was quite cute. But for some more practical and more tenable kind of ways forward, I really would like us to highlight what you and Ruth are doing in the Serene Lawyer. Now, folks, this is not a marketing webinar. I think we've established that there is a great need, and this is to start a conversation. Some of the people who are doing some wonderful things, I think, for attorneys and advocates specifically, I think, are Ruth and Doris. And for this, I'd like to highlight what Ruth and Doris are doing with the Serene Lawyer. Please tell us a bit more about that, Doris. I'm going to ask Nadia to also just put the links in. Those of you who would like to get involved, you can either join a support group, you can go look at their website, or you can join their mailing list. So it was actually quite great. Someone about 5 minutes ago said, "Isn't there some sort of support group for lawyers?" And I said, "Well, watch this space." So Doris, over to you.
Thank you, Mervyn. Well, Ruth and I are collaborating to bring better mental health to litigation lawyers specifically. We also plan in future to give support groups to mental health professionals who testify as expert witnesses in trials. We both have knowledge and experience of how those expert witnesses are abused and really traumatized by horrible judges and horrible legal practitioners. But our main focus is on litigation lawyers. I have found that it's not enough for me to just know the information about self-care. That information is freely available on the internet. What I need is support. I need to be in a group of people who totally get me, who can relate to my experiences, and with whom I can be in a safe space and know I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who suffers from these problems. I'm not the only woman who is a single mother who has to juggle mothering with lawyering. There are others, and there are solutions. I can hear what other people suggest and ideas that I might try out. And especially since COVID, the level of isolation amongst litigation lawyers has been extreme. In the old days, you know, one could chat with one's colleagues in the common room. That doesn't exist anymore. So Ruth and I are rolling out support groups for litigation lawyers starting on the 9th of March. We offer online support group sessions and face-to-face support group sessions in an actual room, which we think is actually the most helpful, because there's something wonderful about sitting in a room with other people. In case you're worried about confidentiality, everyone who joins a support group has to sign a confidentiality agreement. We do not mention names of clients, judges, opponents, anything like that. The idea is to create a safe space where we can share and where we can support each other. In addition, Ruth and I will be presenting 4 paid webinars. The first one is on the 1st of March. The title is Dealing with High Conflict People. And the guest speaker is Megan Hunter. She is the CEO and founding member of the High Conflict Institute in the United States. She has co-authored books and is a published author in regards to dealing with high conflict people. Our next webinar will be presented by Ruth, and that topic is understanding your triggers, understanding and calming your triggers, which is something, it's a how-to webinar. And the third webinar, the topic is understanding what holds us back from practicing self-care. And Ruth will show us that it's not enough to know what self-care to practice. Most of us know that. We need to look within ourselves and find what is holding us back from practicing self-care and thereby overcoming those obstacles. And the final and fourth how-to webinar is building resilience. That is something, the benefits of which are obvious. So by all means, also feel free to go to my website, serenelawyer.com, and you will see more information there. If you would like to join a support group, please click on the link that says join support group in the chat and give me your name and email address, and I will send you the registration documents. If you would like to be on the Serene Lawyer mailing list, please add your click on that link and give us your name and email address. And as a thank you gift for signing up, I will send you a free PDF whose title is 8 Things You Can Do to Make Your Next Day in Court Less Stressful. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Doris. Just to confirm, for those who would like to attend your paid webinars, can they go to your website and register there?
Let them click on the link that I've put in the chat to sign up for registered for the webinars, and I will then the registration documents.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Doris. I appreciate all of your input, and I really look forward to seeing what you and Ruth are going to be doing with our litigation lawyers and experts. So just in case the impression is made that it's only the lawyers getting love today, I'm going to direct our attention to Ornay now for a few minutes. And what she's going to tell us about is her journey in terms of discussion on the need for mental health support for mediators, and specifically those who are not necessarily lawyers who also work with families with specific focus on mediators who obviously also see a lot of stressful things in the context of mediation and have also got this tension and this pressure. There was a disclosure of domestic violence in mediation. What do I do? Do I preserve my own non-bias? Do I report? Do I compromise myself? How do I deal with this? So I'm going to hand over to Ornay, and she's going to tell us about her experiences in terms of a need for mental health support for mediators. Right, over to you, Ornay. You are still muted, Ornay.
Sorry. I think it's one of our things that we do today, you know. You're not on a screen, or you off sound or whatever. It's become a little litany. Right, so thank you for that. I think my concern for mediators started right from when I started looking at the field of mediation. I love people. And I must admit, I do like a little bit of pathology. I know, Ruth, you'll frown at me here, but We do. We have pathology. We do like a little bit of pathology. So when I looked at my own road to become a mediator, taking into consideration that I do have other things I do as well, I was very specific about what I needed, and I will join Doris as well in saying that, and Mervyn, I also burnt out, and I did that twice. You would think that if you do it once, you will learn, but I'm afraid I didn't. I mean, I really seriously did it twice. And the second time, I actually thought, you are totally crazy. But, you know, sometimes we have to learn the hard way, because a lot of the time our minds play tricks on us, you know. And some of it's been said already, but the self-talk thing that we do, oh, you weak, you can't cope. But I think the biggest problem, and that's the one I identify with most, is we take on too much responsibility without doing enough homework. And is see that we are equipped to do what we want to do and what we need to do. In the old days, I trained virtually all the social workers in South Africa on substance abuse prevention. And it was very interesting that when you work with this, and you learn that how people are affected, because if you work in the in the various provinces and there's virtually no backup or no resource for you, it's very, very hard. And people work far apart from one another. And it reminds me of our work as mediators as well, especially after COVID, because that was a place in all of our lives that brought us to a standstill, and actually said, my normal things do not work here. We eventually started doing the webinars then on screen and via the various platforms, to be of support, to help people, to keep them busy and not to go into these deep depressions. But all the people I work with, all the mediators I work with, have got very similar issues. And as we've said before, it doesn't bear repeating necessarily, but I will say this again, that it doesn't mean you're weak. For me, recognizing that you are in a situation where you are heading for disaster, that for me makes you a strong person. That makes me think that you're a mindful person, because you are realistic about what you are facing and what you have to deal with. And also, once again, in my old training days, I used to say to people, but you are responsible in what you do for people's lives. And I think once we realize that, we also understand what we need to be able to deal with this in a responsible way, so we actually help people and not hinder them. In terms of some of the concepts that I'd like to just share with you, I think, Doris, you also mentioned the whole thing of boundaries. Now, I am very serious about boundaries, and everybody I work with understands that there are boundaries. And the first person you have to have boundaries for is yourself. You are the worst person in the world for this, because we always think, maybe we can find a few minutes for this. Maybe we can still take on this, and shame these people. That's the way we think. No. That is not the way we should think. We first have to have boundaries for ourselves and then everybody else in our lives. And one of the sad things for me, and it was interesting that Doris also mentioned this, I do deal with a lot of legal people, without being too specific, who've got serious substance abuse problems. Because now we're tired, we go home, so let's drink have something to drink, which by itself is not a problem. It's the pattern that evolves from there that is the problem. So the connection we make in our heads between being tired, being exhausted, being stressed, and having a drink, that's the dangerous thing. And it also stops us very often from finding other more suitable ways and more sustainable ways of actually staying sane while we're also staying sober. So sanity is an important thing for us to keep in mind. We also have to understand, that everybody has that mediation is an art and it's a science. Now, even though mediation is still battling to really get itself going and get itself organized and having legislation and all the rest of that type of thing. We have to do our own regulation within ourselves. And I do believe that the art of mediation is exactly that, where the way we practice, how we do this, that is the art. And I think it's a nice way of thinking about it. The science of it, obviously, is knowing the laws that we work with and learning to deal with the people we work with. In mediation, our focus is also very much on the psychology of our people that we work with, what they look like, what their families are like, helping people to know what. I, for instance, refuse to do maintenance. And everybody who knows me knows, do not come close to me for maintenance. It's one of my boundaries. I hate doing maintenance, but I have people who do love to do maintenance. And I think that's the other thing that we need to learn, is to expose ourselves to other resources in our world. Because there's a lot of people who do a lot better with maintenance than I would in any case, and it would just create unnecessary stress for me. I would also mention that last year I did a webinar for SAM on toxic clients. And I see some of the people on that webinar also here today. And what came out was this whole issue of how unprotected we are to a great extent. If something goes wrong and people report you, what support is there for you? It's a huge worry, you know. Is there insurance for people in the mediation field that you can fall back on? Is there support for you even if you've made a mistake and there is a case against you? Is there support for you as a person going through that very, very difficult process? Now, I would like to just mention a few issues here. We've already started a WhatsApp group for this particular issue. As I've mentioned before, my agreement with Mervyn is that all the legal issues, the legal questions will go straight back to him. And we'll deal with that on his group, the ThinkLegal group. But we have now started a group for mediators. I see I've already had about 20 people would like to join that, which is excellent, and thank you very much for that. So I'm going to do a little bit of research first, which I'll probably do next week. And then we will then take it there. Obviously, we are looking at resources for our people. We are looking for a space in which you can just vent whatever you like to somebody who will understand and who will actually help to reorganize your thinking. In terms of some of the burnout, we're talking a lot about burnout. I was wondering, Mervyn, I've got this set piece I've written for burnout prevention. Maybe we can make that available for whoever's interested.
Possibly, yes, yeah. Absolutely. We'll distribute it.
Yeah, so we'll do that, and we can do some reading on that specifically. But in terms of this, exhaustion is a very important thing we have to look at, physical and mental exhaustion. I don't know about you, but sometimes you have the sense of, I just cannot do this anymore. I am done. I am tired. I'm physically and mentally exhausted. What do we do then? We take on another case, because maybe that one will be easier. Okay, maybe that one will put something back into my world and my life that nobody else has done. Because remember, people take away from you in many cases if you allow it. So exhaustion is a very important one to consider. That this is both physical and mental exhaustion. I'm just going to highlight a few of these things that we're going to send this out. A very important one for me that I see a lot of is this whole issue of depersonalization, where we start withdrawing. We start saying, oh, they're all the same. It's just going to be the same story again. They just keep on fighting. They never want to see reason. I'm just done with all of this. Because let's face it, in our work, unless you bring in some lighter moments, it is rather hectic, We listen to a lot of hard stuff all the time. I do quite a bit of work still in domestic violence. Everybody thinks my sanity is questionable in this regard, but I'm used to working with that, you understand. But if you're not used to working with that, please don't do it. But we have to be selective. We have to set boundaries for this, because the minute you start losing empathy, you're in trouble. And that doesn't mean that you have this overly, I'm so sorry for you, and, you know, everything else, and my heart breaks for you. We don't do that. This is not what we do. It's not helpful to us or the people we're working with. But we never must lose that empathic approach to people, to say, I see you. I see you human. I see you're in need. And that's exactly why we want to start helping, or not be helping necessarily, but being there for our mediators as well. And we will still sort out, as I said, the practicalities. Now, I hear you all telling people what you do to relax a bit. Everybody knows what I do. I garden. That is my thing. You know, if you work with people as we do, you can plant, you can seed, you can water, you can do everything, you can give good compost. There's no guarantee that they will grow. But when you garden, your chances are fairly good that if you care for them properly, they will reward you with what you expect of them. So when I garden, my head turns off. I think that's a problem with a lot of mediators and the legal professional people, is that our heads never stop turning. You wake up in the morning, you're already working with what you've got to do today. Last night, you fall asleep, if you're lucky enough to sleep, thinking about, oh my word, did I do this? Have I done that? Isn't that what we do? How healthy is that? How well do we sleep? Do we get enough rest? Do we eat properly? No, we don't, because we're too busy. We don't have time for lunch. We will have a quick banana if we're lucky. Guys, this is not how we work. This is not how we survive all of this. This is not how we serve our colleagues and our clients. We have to be fit and well. So keep an eye open for these. I will send this. We will send this out to you, which gives you a nice breakdown of what it looks like, and some ideas on what to look for. I am known as the homework queen of South Africa. So do not speak to me in any way if you haven't read this, because at least then we can start working from where we're all at. So that's the homework. Thank you.
Lovely. Orne, thank you so much. I really do look forward to seeing what you're going to do with the WhatsApp group for the mediators, simply as a safe place to decompress and to kind of help in taking the edge off mediation practice, which is obviously in and of itself a hell of a big challenge. Right, so folks, I'm going to be diverting our attention now to a bit of Q&A. Just a few ground rules in terms of the Q&A, more for our speakers than anyone else. I did promise our attendees that the meeting chat would be private. It is not going to be on the recording, so we're not going to refer to any of our questions by the name of the person that asked the question, just to protect their identities in terms of Poppy, etc., because this is going to be distributed in recording form. So if I do not call you by your name, please do not be offended. Right. Orne, since you have just come off the mic, I want to actually pose this first question to you, and I see Nadia is copying and pasting some of the questions that came in through the chat. Those who still want to ask questions, please don't be shy. Please put them there. I'm going to run through 2 or 3 questions that we had in the registration forms, which I think are very, very nice, germane questions to get us kicked off. And then we'll go into the questions which Nadia is going to paste us, and then we'll go into new questions that may arise from participants from there. Orne, the first question comes to you from a mediator, and it's with regards to co-mediating, and it actually deals with one of our other questions, the one that Nadia had here. How do you know when you are close to burnout? And there's a bit of a different spin to this question, and I'm going to read it. When co-mediating, how would you suggest flagging stressed or burnt out behavior ahead of an explosion? Then this person talks about in the session of mediation, their co-mediator simply lost their cool, exploded, withdrew from mediation, and the parties had to then be referred to someone else to finish the mediation. So what are the behaviors, I think, is the big thing. The first question is, how do you identify burnt out behavior? And then the second question is to do with, how can one deal with that in restoring this working relationship going forward? So over to you, Orne.
Right, thank you. Firstly, I would just like to say that co-mediation today is becoming very popular. It is not new, I don't think, but I think the trend in terms of co-mediating is actually growing. Personally, I think co-mediation is a good idea. I think it can bring, especially when it's complicated cases. Just remember, you can't bring in a co-mediator after you've started, because then it disrupts your agreement. So yeah, co-mediation, if that's your choice of doing this, I know of people who have practices that only do co-mediation. Whatever works, remember, that's what we're looking at. What is working for you? What's working for your clients? So, but the thing is, like we have here, is when you select a co-mediator, you have got to spend time to actually, it's not a quick fix thing, this. You have to know the person. You have to ask questions of this person. You have to have discussions about what your approach is. How do you, because look, we all have our different styles. And if you choose a co-mediator whose style is so different to yours that it's not functional, functional for me is a very important word. If it's not going to add value, don't do it. But the minute it adds value, in other words, it actually gives you the edge in terms of there's added value because of the two people that you come together, and we have synergy. Because very often in co-mediation, you look at each other, you just catch each other's eye. We all know that thing that we do, and catch the eye and just know, I think it's better that you take this or I take this, whatever, that communication. But it's not a spontaneous thing. It's very hard to do that with people you don't know. And so you need to know the person. You need to have actually sat down and had a conversation. It's not an on-paper thing. You understand what I mean by that? It's not something we just write a little memo and say, okay, this is what we want. We need to know each other. We need to talk about each other, and we have to strategize. It's very important that co-mediators strategize together about the case that they are going to be dealing with. So that's the preparation that's needed before we start mediating, so that we have all our ducks in a row and we are ready to proceed as professional people dealing with this issue. Very often, in my experience, the co-mediation is really helpful when it's seriously conflicted cases. So your approach would need to be synchronized in a certain sense, so that you actually deal with all the aspects of what you're going to be dealing with. From there on, then obviously, now, I'm a supervisor, so I do all my supervision in court. Now, this whole issue that's described here, I often have in court when I'm doing the final supervision, when my people freeze and they don't know what question to ask next. So I'm just using that as an example. So I'm used to having these extremely anxious looks at me, because if you don't know what to do next, if you can't follow the process, it's a problem. So that's the one aspect that we have to prepare, and we have to have a safety. Look, I'm the safety release valve in that, because I will just then continue, obviously, because we're working in court and our people have to be served. But the work you do beforehand, and you're going to see a lot of this in this handout I'm sending. But firstly, there's physical stuff you have to look at for your co-mediator. Do they look tired? People look tired. They look exhausted. You can actually see it. What do their tone of voices sound like? Is it chirpy? Is it happy? Is it excited? Is it negative? Is it, I've been here before and it's not worked? What is that? What's the tone of voice? What's this person's philosophy in life? Why are we doing what we're doing? If we are doing this to help people, remember I said this doesn't work for me. Are you qualified to do what you're doing? Check the qualifications, check the experience of this person. Have they ever done this before? Because co-mediation is like a little skill. You need to know what you're doing. Have you done this before? Shall we do a little exercise or a little practice session beforehand? We'll get somebody and just do a little practice session. It's important for us to be able to look at that. So obviously, appearance is also important. Is this person, are they neat? Are they orderly? Are they tidy? I'm not talking fashionable here. We're not interested in long nails and earrings. We're looking at, do they look after themselves? Do they look well? Or do they present well? Do you pick up a sense of a bit of suspicion? You know, is there a bit of, I'm not sure that this is going to work, but yeah. We need to talk about that. We need to discuss that to see if this is really going to work. Is there a dissatisfaction? I mean, we all have people in our lives who are just totally dissatisfied with their life and world that we live in. It's just that negative, pulling everything down type of thing. That's not a good candidate for co-mediation because it sets a tone that is very hard to break down afterwards. And there's a verbal, but also a physical presentation that you look out for. Is this person overly anxious, do you think? You know, are they twitchy? Are they sort of unsure of themselves and so on? Also another indicator to clarify, sort it out. In terms of behavior, is there anything you pick up in terms of, does this person overreact to things? Do they need to really go into stuff and get every bit, every iota of stuff? Do they need to, you understand, that sort of over stuff, overextended? That's also a problem because working with another person in this, it can really put you off. It can really drag you into the quagmire that you don't want to go into. So overreaction is also a no-no, but you can understand why it's important to look after people, you know, to look into this before you start. Are they irritable, impatient? What's all this preparation about? Can't we just go in and just do this? No, we can't. So no, so that sort of sense of, you know, we must now do something. We must get going here. This is wasting our time. You know, I've got other clients to see as well. And this, you know, we've been there, right? When talking to these people, your prospective co-mediators, what's their sort of mien? Oh, I love using a word like that. What do they? Are they calm? Are they relaxed? Are they open? Do they listen? Are they open to share? Are they ready to differ on approaches and things like that? Are they tactful? It's so nice to work with tactful people. I seem to have a lot. I come across a lot of tactless people, and you need to. There's an exercise we do in NLP work where you do this, you know, and I teach my clients to say that this is tuning somebody out. You know, you can use it in many ways, but sometimes you just want to tune somebody out. But now in mediation, we can't do that. So we have to do it beforehand. And this is also, I'm hoping that, I don't want to go into too much further detail, but you have an idea of what I'm getting at. Once again, as with mediation, as with taking on a case as a lawyer or an advocate, we have to do our homework. We have to know what we want. We have to be very open and above board. And even if it comes to actually having a written agreement, if that's going to suit the situation, go there and do that. The last one I want to just mention would be the defense mechanisms. Now, we all use defense mechanisms. Some of us use them all the time, some of us lesser, but there's denial. Now, denial is not just a river in Egypt. Coming from the substance abuse field many years, I work a lot with denial, but I work a lot with denial everywhere. And especially with sometimes people in our world of work, you know, where we are in denial. Let's not go there. It's not good for anybody. There's blaming, there's rationalizing, there's intellectualizing. I always think about the giraffes, you know, high up in the air. You know, we don't do this here, you know, sort of thing. Transference, and then of course projection. So with that, I'm going to end off and just say that please, if you are going to go into co-mediation, by all means do that, but do it properly. Prepare, do all the stuff that we've mentioned today. We will in the near future start up our group where we are going to join in and discuss matters and so on. I will let everybody who's asked to join know by next week. And then we will take it from there. And then we can discuss on the practicalities of how we are going to assist people, mediators specifically, in this arena. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ordnay, for the very, very thorough rundown of things to look for in terms of burnout. How do you tell if someone else is burnt out? And I suppose these are all things also that one can look for in yourself. If you're willing to do a little bit of introspection, you can ask yourself questions. Am I irritable? Am I defensive? Am I not looking after myself? Do I feel listless? Do I feel paranoid? Do I feel that, you know, what's the point? Do I have to watch TV every waking second? Do I have to fall asleep with a book in my hands because I can't get my head to shut up, I suppose is the best term. All signs of burnout. The next question I'm going to pose to Doris, I think it's a very, very good question, and I really applaud the person for asking this, who asked me to convey it anonymously. And it's this. I'm a junior counsel. I really battle with three aspects. The first refers to this counsel having billed, and then once they sent their bill, the attorneys were very, very nasty, refused to pay it, threatened her with LPC, told her she'd make herself a fool in court if she took them on. And this poor counsel is now paralyzed to actually do invoices for opposed motions. How does one deal with that? She then very, very honestly shares the following. Sometimes due to uncertainty and not always knowing the answer, I feel like a complete failure in my career, not always knowing the answer, leading to doubt myself and my career. I want to, if they are in the webinar, number one, thank them for having the guts to state it. And number two, I think from my side as an attorney, I'm not an advocate. I think if I go a week without feeling like a failure, a fraud, or a phony, or feeling that I don't know what's going on, I really haven't grafted that week, to be honest. I think these are mutual feelings, and it really highlights the need for us to start talking about them, because unfortunately people feel so shamed in feeling these feelings of inadequacy when actually it's quite normal, isn't it? But I'll stop prattling on. Doris, over to you.
Thank you, Mervyn, and thank you for those questions. In regard to the advocate's nightmare of not being paid for work done, I totally identify and relate to that. It's horrible. Especially as a very junior counsel, I remember being abused by attorneys in regard to my fees. As a very junior advocate, I would be only too grateful that an attorney was kind enough to brief me, and I wouldn't raise the subject of what my fee rate was or what the fee arrangement was, and the unscrupulous attorneys would take advantage of that. And when I had done all the work, then I would send an invoice and they would say that my fee was too high, and or challenge whether or not I did the work. So my experience that I can share is very practical in that regard. Unless it's an attorney who I already know and trust, if a new attorney approaches me, before I decide whether or not to accept that brief, I say, that sounds like an interesting brief. Let us talk about fees. We talk, in some cases, I actually write out a fee agreement with the attorney. We agree what is the hourly rate. We agree on how frequently I will invoice that attorney. We will agree on what the terms of payment are. Now, even if you are a member of the bar, you do not have to wait 97 days. That is just the default situation. There's nothing stopping you from writing in your fee agreement that you will pay me once a week on presentation of invoice, or that you will pay me by the end of the month in which I do the work. Those are things which you are perfectly entitled to discuss and agree on. Another thing that causes a lot of stress to advocates is when the attorney omits to take a deposit for fees, for counsel's fees up front into his or her trust account. The sad thing is that those are often the attorneys who are very kind and soft-hearted, and they feel sorry for the client, and they say, well, okay, you can, I'll collect the fees from you in a few months' time, but they are not doing themselves or the client or the advocate any favors. I strongly suggest that you ask your instructing attorney to confirm with you before you start doing the work how much money they have taken as a deposit into their trust account, and to consult with you as to what the initial deposit should be, and also to keep on topping up those deposits. It sounds very harsh, it sounds very superficial that we, advocates have to talk about sordid things like money, but it does matter, and it is important. In regard to feeling like a failure, I get you, I really feel you there. Since I started at the bar, I was always worried that I was going to stuff everything up. Every time I made a mistake, I would have agonies about it and say, well, I'm clearly not fit to practice, and I think I should go and get a job as a teller at a supermarket, but maybe I couldn't even cope with that. So just to put it in perspective, if I was a client, I would rather go to an advocate who feels those kind of anxieties about inadequacy than go to an advocate who is overly confident and who doesn't even notice when they make stupid mistakes. I really prefer someone who does doubt themselves, because it shows some degree of humility and self-reflection. For me, those terrors of inadequacy and being a failure, I deal with those very much in my therapy sessions and with the people with whom I feel safe. There are some people who are some advocates and even some attorneys who I've known for many years who are actually friends, and I can confide in them and say, you know what, I think I stuffed up in this case. I think I made a stupid decision. And what I can share that really works is, if I do think I've done something stupid, ventilate it immediately, with a colleague, with a therapist, with the instructing attorney. We are professional colleagues. And the thing is, if I raise it immediately, the chances there are that if I did make a mistake, I can fix it, or we can fix it together. And it's very painful to face the fact that I'm not perfect. It's inevitable that I and everyone in my profession are going to make mistakes. And of course, we're terrified of making mistakes because our opponents are there to pounce on them, and sometimes our clients pounce on those mistakes. So that's where, a rigorous commitment to self-honesty, self-reflection, and taking action to make reparation and to make amends where I have made a mistake, that works. There are very few things that simply cannot be fixed. What cannot be fixed is arrogance, total arrogance, and the unwillingness to consider that maybe I'm imperfect. The other thing to guard against making mistakes is using the principle of collegiality at the bar and generally in the advocate's profession, in the attorney's profession. Ask a senior colleague, I've got this case, I don't know what to do. What do you advise me to do? That makes you a better advocate. It gives your clients end up getting a better service, and it improves the quality of service that the profession gives as a whole. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Doris. I really appreciate the very authentic way in which you answer the question. I really think that our profession would be better served if a lot more of us could be as authentic. So on that note, for those of you who thought I made up the cat anecdote, it was actually based on a true story. This is Matilda, and she has now decided she wants attention. So Dad had to pick her up. She's now my new office manager at my home office. So please do forgive if you hear a nice purr on the microphone. Right, so I've got one more question from the registration form, and it is the following. How do I stop getting so emotionally involved in children's matters? I've been on a somewhat sabbatical from family matters for a few months because I'm still recovering from the last one. How do I manage feelings of stress and anxiety when it comes to urgent matters? Currently, I'm just increasing my dosage of psychiatric medication. I want to be able to manage these feelings more constructively. As I said earlier when we started off, if you don't know the terms urbanol, leximal, stress Venlaw, congratulations, your life is going great and you're clearly not in family practice. From an attorney's point of view, I think it is particularly devastating when dealing with children's matters and getting an outcome that is not necessarily favorable. I don't think it's possible to completely stop getting emotionally involved in these matters because there is a kind of healthy emotional involvement. It's called empathy. It's called human kindness, dignity. And if we lose that as attorneys, we can run the serious risk of becoming completely calloused and completely disconnected from the reality of what our clients feel. I'm a very, very big fan of Terry Pratchett, who's an author who passed away several years ago, and he had this one character who would say the following: you do the good that's in front of you and forget everything else. Do the good that's in front of you. You do the best for your client. You try your best to get a good, ethical, decent outcome. Sometimes you will win, and you have to celebrate those wins. Sometimes you will lose, and to shrug off those losses are really tough. Nadia was so kind as to share on our social media my little sanity checklist, which I did a few years back after a particularly devastating December urgent matter. I see Lee's also in this meeting. She and I were working on it together. And with a particularly horrible opponent, with a particularly rude judge, a particularly sordid matter. And I was devastated for weeks after it. And I spoke to several of my attorney colleagues, and I discussed it with a silk who told me, listen, you did nothing wrong. This judge has just been on a roll. This is what she said to another silk who was in the same role in this week. And but I took it hard and I took it tough. It wasn't lacquer. I don't think it's supposed to be lacquer. But when I started putting things into perspective and realizing there was nothing mala fide in what I did my best for the client. I put my client's version before the court. And eventually, lo and behold, 6-7 months later, the matter eventually settled and we were able to normalize it. But it doesn't become any easier. We just have to become tougher. I said to you guys earlier when we started with this webinar, mental health management is not touchy-feely. It's not about singing Kumbaya. It's not about being in touch with your feminine side, which is such a silly thing in any event to say something like that. But that's the perception out there. It's tough. It's about grappling with your demons. it's about facing the prospect in your own mind that, sure, I might not be good enough, and having to ventilate it and to start dealing with your own humanity. And it's only when we deal with that humanity that we can actually start serving people, colleagues, employees, families, our children. So that's my 2 cents on how to stop getting emotionally involved in children's matters. I think we should be involved in children's matters in a healthy way. I think we should have empathy. I think we should have our own moral compass to guide us. But we need to equip ourselves to deal with our own emotional fallout and intellectual and spiritual fallout, in terms of the outcomes of these things. There are 1 or 2 interesting questions which I'd like to raise. I think we've dealt sufficiently with the question, how do you know when you're close to burnout? I really like that that question. I think Orne did a great job of looking at that. I had one that resonated with me a little bit earlier. Someone was talking about the stresses of balancing work and being a parent. Doris, I'm going to ask you to actually jump in with this one, if you don't mind. I know you've got the support group for single mom lawyers, and it's something that you're obviously also grappling with from what you told us earlier. The person writes the following: I need help with my parenting skills. I feel I'm harming my kids. I'm always at work and I don't even know what games or activities to do with them for fun. At home, I spend much time in my bedroom working. I think I need a new coping mechanism and balance parenting skills. And I'll be painfully real and say that I replied to them and said, well, this is something that I'm also grappling with. When I get home and my daughter wants to play and I'm dead tired, how do you cope with that? How do you balance lawyering and parenting? So Doris, over to you. And I'm also all ears on this one.
Thank you for that question. I've been a single mother since my daughter was a baby. And the first thing I have to accept is that being a single mother and a litigation lawyer, I need to accept that every day when I wake up, I must know that I'm going to let someone down, all of someone's expectations. I won't be able to meet all of my daughter's expectations and all of my clients and instructing attorneys' expectations. And that is the hard reality, and I've got to swallow it. So I'll tell you quite frankly that my daughter, over the time that she was growing up, was neglected at times emotionally. She wasn't on the street, but she was emotionally neglected at times, and I often comment, only half jokingly, that the law requires that one puts the best interests of a minor child above all else. But there were times when I put the best interests of my clients above the emotional needs of my daughter. There were many times when she was growing up where she would come and ask me something and I'd say, no, I'm working, I can't, sorry. And I don't have any magic answers to that other than radical acceptance. It is very hard to be a mother and an advocate. It is very hard to be in the war zone of litigation. And as a mother, I do need to be in touch with my feminine side and my mothering and nurturing qualities. And I have failed at that many times. However, on the positive side, I'm very grateful that my daughter, who is now 22, has turned out really well. And one of the things that I have done is I have arranged for her to get the support that she needs from people who are not me. And that is a result of facing the reality that I cannot meet all of my child's needs, but I know some people who can. And I've made it a priority to make sure that she can have professional help and support whenever, when she needs it. And that has been pretty much most of her childhood. So, now that as I've got older and I'm more in control of what cases I can take and what cases not to take, I can create a bit more of a balance. But it's not easy. It helps me to be able to speak to my therapist about this problem. What has also helped me is to have frank discussions with my daughter, to always encourage her throughout her childhood to tell me what her frustrations are. You know, I think she was 8 years old when she said to me, "Mommy, I miss you. You know, we used to spend more time together. Now, when I ask you to watch a movie with me, you just say, no, it's really hard for me." You know, and my answer was, you know, my darling, I really understand that. And I know that it's really hard. And I need to work so that I can support us, because I was also the only breadwinner, you know, in the family. And I'm not saying that then she just happily accepted it. It was still painful for her. But the fact that we could communicate about it openly, it did help very much. And that I did explain to her what my reasons are. But you know, I don't have a magic bullet for this. I remember once there was a time when I was working incredibly hard. I was in like one trial after the next, and she left a little note under my pillow to say, "Mommy, you know, you promised me that we would spend an hour together yesterday afternoon, and you broke your promise. And you've just been giving me money and more money, and you can't fix everything by throwing money at me, you know." And when I found this note, I felt terrible. I jumped in my car, went and fetched her from aftercare, took her out to, you know, for a milkshake. So there's a lot of mom guilt, single mom guilt. And my solution for that is radical acceptance. That's how it is. But there are other sources of support for my child, and that luckily I can pay for those things because I earn a good income. Thanks.
Doris, thank you so much. What a real, authentic answer. I really, really appreciate it that we can speak very frankly about it. I think we might run over a minute or two, folks. There are two more questions which I really would like to deal with. And if we go over a couple of minutes, obviously we won't be upset. Those who have just earmarked the 2 hours, I know we're all busy practitioners. If you do need to go, thank you for joining us. It's been absolutely lovely. I hope to see you on the WhatsApp groups, and I see you for the next webinars. However, I think the two questions which I really would like us to deal with, and if there are other ones, if we go on to 10 past, I'm sure Ruth, Ordnay, and Doris will forgive me, just to make sure that we address all the questions. Here's an interesting one. An attorney, and this is one I'm going to actually jump in with, quite close to my heart. I'll tell you an anecdote about something that happened with me years back. I've had such bad experience with many of my clients in terms of WhatsApp. Many of my clients want instant gratification, thus immediate responses from me on WhatsApp. When I try to tell them to rather email me, it works for a short while, and then they start with WhatsApping again. They send me question marks and hellos, and when I don't respond, I don't want to block them, as this is going to create ill feelings between us. How do I go about setting these boundaries for existing clients in a friendly way? I'm far too friendly with many of my clients, and I don't know how to stop doing this without sounding too harsh, particularly because many of them have told me they love the fact that I'm readily available for them on short notice. That sounds a bit like gaslighting, if you ask me. I'll tell you an anecdote. When my wife and I were very, very young and married, not that I'm grey behind the ears as yet, but it was a good part of almost a decade ago. We had a tradition. On Friday evenings, we would sit outside on the veranda and we would have a whiskey. And we would do that after hours, nothing nefarious. And this one Friday evening, a client of mine phoned me in a panic after I'd had a whiskey or two. And I said, "Listen, what's the problem?" "No, my ex-wife is here to pick up my daughter, and the person driving the car does not have a license. What must I do?" And I thought to myself, what you must do is not bother me with obvious SHIT on a Friday night. Nevertheless, I neutralized the situation, and I actually realized something there. An emergency number is your friend. And I implemented it for my practice that day. We have an emergency number. My mandate tells people if they want to get hold of us, they can phone on the emergency number and someone will canvass, whether it's urgent or not. And that rotates. You'll also see, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at our registration emails, my cell phone number is not on my signature. I frankly think it's this whole instant gratification thing is unreasonable with clients. You know, there are some clients that do have my WhatsApp number, but those clients spend a lot of money with my firm. And ironically, those clients are not the ones who harass me. Those are the clients who have respect for the fact that I say, listen, guys, between 5 and 8 at night, I'm pro non-scripter. I'm like Martha Stewart. I like cooking. That's when I'm cooking for my family. That's when my wife and my daughter and I have our evening routine. Don't bother me in that time. It's sacrosanct. I will ignore you. It's very sad that we are almost brainwashed into thinking that we will be seen as discourteous for setting boundaries. And I'm telling this attorney now, you're not discourteous. They are bloody discourteous. They need to respect you as a professional. And if they don't, consider cutting loose that client. Honestly, because those are the types of clients who will end up dragging you to the LPC for nonsense. Those are the types of clients who will not pay your account for silly reasons. My advice on this, I very, very jokingly say to clients, listen, here's my number, but I've got a little one. The CEO needs attention. And if I don't give the CEO attention, I'm going to get fired. And another one I always say to clients is don't bother me after hours. I don't have enough money for a divorce. Luckily, my wife is very, very tolerant, but I can use her as the boogeyman. And most people are quite receptive to it. Unfortunately, some people are not. So I hope that gives you a little bit of guidance in terms of that. Then I've got another question here, which is an interesting one. I'd actually, Ruth, I haven't picked on you in a while. How would one deal with gossip among colleagues when they know that you were hospitalized? Which is obviously quite a difficult one in terms of the dynamic within a working relationship.
I think it's a very real concern, and I think it's one of the concerns that stops people from going for treatment. But I think that I always think that you should be open, but no one has, you also have the right to privacy. So it's about balancing that. If you know that they're going to be gossiping, it's usually better to tell people, because otherwise people make it up. But you don't have to give them all the details. I really believe you can, if people know you were hospitalized, you could say, I was hospitalized. I really was very burnt out. I've been given, I'm recovering, and thank you for your concern. So I don't think you need to tell people your diagnosis. I don't think you need to tell people the ins and outs. But I think that the more that we are able to set boundaries in terms of, people don't have to know, they don't have the right to know intricate details. But I also think that as we stop feeling that there's such a stigma, I think, Mervyn, you said it, courage is about being able to ask for help when you need it. It is far more important that you can get the treatment rather than, because you're wanting to avoid all of that, you're going to land up not being able to cope, letting down your clients anyway, and because you can't function properly. So I think that we need to see the ability to request help as a sign of strength. It's not a weakness. It's a sign of strength to be able to recognize that you're needing support and be able to get it. So I think if there is gossip, my feeling would be to address it, but be very boundaried. in terms of what you're saying. And then the more people kind of start hearing that, you know, it's okay. You can get help, you can go into a clinic, and you can come out, and you'll probably be far more functional if you've received treatment and are having, you know, and you've now been able to put things in place than people who avoid it, who are just using substances, who are just numbing themselves, and who are just completely depleted.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ruth. That's excellent, excellent advice. There's an interesting conversation that's now evolved here in the chat bar with the attorneys, and I want to share something with them. For those of you who haven't seen it, very, very well worth a watch. From our previous query on the WhatsApps, the same person very, very honestly shared, you know, they have also got an issue with fees. They're far too friendly with their clients in terms of reducing rates, and everyone struggles financially to some degree. And someone else then came in and said, yes, it's such a grudge payment. Clients really hate paying legal fees. It's such an issue. Same problem with WhatsApps. In my experience, guys, and take it from where it comes, take it with a pinch of salt if necessary. The WhatsApp problem clients are going to be the payment problem clients because they have a deficient level of respect for you. They don't believe that you are worth their respect. That's why I was very quick earlier to say maybe, you know, consider cutting that client loose. I shared a video in the chat box. This is a video I saw a few years back by a lady called Casey Brown. It's a TED Talk. It was called Know Your Worth and Then Ask for It. And I must tell you personally, this video changed my life. I was at that stage, I think it was about 5 years ago, plus minus. I was charging a rate which was very far under market related. And I had to get to a point of actually upping my rate. And our market research showed that I had to up my rate by 1,000 Rand an hour. And I sat down and I said, sheesh, are people actually still going to pay me if I do that? And I said, well, we have to. I'm working 7 in the morning to 7 at night back then, and I am like, the firm is at a break-even point now. It's just not good. We did it, and guess what? Clients still came. And I've gotten to a point now where I am honestly, I really think this term shameless gets a negative rap, but I am shameless when it comes to my fees because I've worked bloody hard, I've studied bloody hard, I've stressed bloody hard to be able to charge clients what I charge. And I am personally very open with my clients, and I say, this is my rate. I know I'm not the cheapest attorney in Roodepoort. There are a lot of attorneys that will work for less, but I'll tell you why I'm worth it. And it's not an arrogant thing. I'll say to them, look, I know I'm not grey behind the ears, but I specialize in big money divorces. I've worked with Silk several times on big money divorces. I've argued in the High Court myself on several matters. I don't do it anymore. However, because I did do it in my younger days, I feel that I can add XYZ value, and this is what I do, and this is my working ethos. Very often people appreciate it. 1 out of 3 people will say, you know what? I can't afford you. And I say to them, good on you. Here's my free divorce booklet. Go on your way. Maybe that will help you. Attorneys out there and advocates, I want to speak directly to you. Stop selling yourself short. You work too bloody hard to go to bed hungry. And if you start going to bed hungry and you're getting traded on WhatsApp by clients, then something's got to give. And start considering the fact that you are selling yourself short. Someone asks in terms of sharing the link, I'll just reshare it. So I think those are the questions. Let me quickly ask Nadia, have we missed any of the questions?
We have one. It says if the attorney accepts a fee from counsel but does not discuss this with client, is the client then bound by this fee if they were not prepared for this cost?
I'll give an attorney's perspective, and I think, Doris, if you can give counsel's perspective. For me, it's very simple. If you as attorney do not properly negotiate fees with counsel, and I love Doris's ethos on this. A lot of counsels get upset with me because I phone them and I say, I'm getting this much trust cover. Is it going to be enough for you, yes or no? Tell me very pointedly, and if it's not going to be enough, you better tell me. If attorneys don't do that, then they are setting themselves up for heartache. Because remember, if Doris invoices me, she invoices me. I'm on the hook for it. It's not my client's problem if they don't pay me. Doris is going to chase me. She's going to report me to the Bar Council. Doris, what's your view on that from counsel's perspective?
Mervyn, I share your view. You know, it's unfortunately because counsel doesn't negotiate directly with the clients. Counsel is dependent on the attorney to make sure that the fees have been properly provided for. Wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much, Doris. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are drawing this session to a close. I want to thank everyone who stuck around. We've had very minimal roll-off in attendance. We had great participation in the chat bar, and I really appreciate everyone having come to this session with an open mind to start having these conversations, to start breaking the stigma that looking after ourselves is weak, it's wrong, it's selfish, it's selfless. We need to look after people, so we need to look after ourselves, folks. To keep the conversation going, please do join us on the WhatsApp groups. I see that I've got a big whack of applications for my WhatsApp group to work through this afternoon before the weekend. Ornay, I know you're going to have quite a few as well, and Doris, I'm sure you're going to have quite a lot as well. Thank you so much to everybody who attended and for your participation in today's session. It really means a lot to me. You guys are enabling my own bad behavior because I frankly would much rather sit here chatting to you guys than sit with my nose in files. So it really is a huge privilege to be able to do this with you folks. Remember our webinar coming up on the 3rd. A registration link will go out with the email. Please do remember Ornay, Doris, and Ruth's initiatives that they are running. Details will also go out with the email, as well as Ornay's booklet on seeing the signs of burnout and dealing with the signs of burnout. The link, just to avoid people asking us on the group, that email will probably go out on Tuesday. I want to give my dear lady wife some weekend time as well to not have to sit and edit videos. So we'll probably do the edit on Monday and get the follow-up out on Tuesday. From my side, Ruth, Doris, Ornay, thank you. You've given us really gold today, and thank you so much for taking of your time, which cumulatively costs a hell of a lot of money. We're billing by the hour, to sit with us today and to really expand the knowledge base on this incredibly important topic. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who attended, and we will see you at the next one and or on the WhatsApp group. So can I ask everybody to switch on their cameras and say cheers to our speakers so we can see some faces before we say goodbye? Look at this. We're actually talking to people, guys. How cool is this? We're not just talking to initials. So guys, thank you so much. Have a lovely weekend. See you at the next one. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.